He's a Löwenmensch.
What the hell is a Löwenmensch?
He's part wolf, part lion.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to completely deconstruct one of the most, bizarre television villains in recent memory.
We're talking about Garrett Douglas from Teen Wolf, specifically season 6A.
Right. We always look for the real myth behind the monster. We assume there's this neat linear history waiting to be uncovered.
But Paul from Teen Wolf News shows us that the most terrifying monsters aren't uncovered at all.
They are built from scraps of history that fundamentally do not belong together.
That is the very definition of modern TV mythopoesis. Garrett Douglas is less a recovered monster and more a manufactured one.
Right, like building a brand new religion out of spare parts.
Exactly. He represents a scavenging of powerful cultural fragments. His body is literally an allegory for stealing history, stealing myth, and stealing souls to construct something new.
It's genuinely incredible. Now, if you're listening to this and you've never actually seen Teen Wolf, stick around anyway, because this completely changes how you watch television.
Oh, absolutely. It's a total masterclass.
It really is. We're looking at how modern storytelling just, scavenges fragments of history and discarded philosophy to manufacture entirely new synthetic myths. And we're going to unpack all of this using the incredibly detailed work from Paul at Teen Wolf News.
Yeah, Paul's research is absolutely essential here because, we usually just assume that when a supernatural show introduces a new monster, the writers are just pulling a fully formed legend off a library shelf.
Right, like there's a neat little Wikipedia page for it.
Exactly. We expect canonical folklore. But according to Paul's research, that is completely the wrong way to look at Douglas. He isn't a straightforward adaptation of an ancient myth at all.
He's actually this brilliant, highly specific hybrid construction.
A composite creature.
Yeah.
Which means the very first thing you have to do is just completely unlearn what you assume a Löwenmensch is.
Right, because on the show, the characters gloss over it pretty fast. They just describe him as part wolf, part lion.
Which is such a deliberate choice of words.
It really is. It has this heavy ancient vibe to it. It sounds like an inherited myth that's been passed down for centuries. Like he belongs in an encyclopedia right next to, a minotaur or a traditional werewolf.
It completely borrows that aesthetic of antiquity. But, and this is a massive point of Paul's research, there is absolutely no canonical mythological tradition behind this exact form.
None at all.
None. There's no developed folklore. You won't find a religious text or an ancient scroll detailing a Löwenmensch's legendary feats. There are literally no rules.
Wow. So it's less like adapting Dracula from a Bram Stoker novel and more like building a Frankenstein's monster of ideas.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
But if there are no ancient rule books for this creature, what is he actually made of? Because Paul breaks Douglas down into a fusion of three totally distinct elements.
He does, yeah. You have his alpha werewolf status, you have the Löwenmensch or lion man element, and then you have this Ghost Rider dimensional residue.
And none of those things naturally belong together.
Not in any historical context, no.
Yeah.
But that actually gives the writers so much power. When you adapt a vampire, you inherit all the boundaries, right?
Yep.
Garlic, sunlight, wooden stakes.
The audience already knows exactly what to expect.
Exactly. But by avoiding a complete ancient myth, the show gets to use the atmosphere of primordial strangeness without being tied down by a fixed theology.
That's a massive creative advantage. It terrifies the audience simply because you have no idea what the boundaries even are.
Right. It functions as what you might call a floating signifier in narrative design. It grants the character this archaic prestige, but without the baggage of an over-explained backstory.
Okay, but that brings up a really big question for me. If this isn't a fairy tale or an inherited myth, where does the name Löwenmensch actually come from?
Well, this is where it gets so fascinating. Paul's research traces this back to a very real physical object.
So we're moving completely out of fantasy and into, hard archaeology.
Exactly. So Löwenmensch translates directly to lion person or lion man in German. And the source of this name is literally a 40,000-year-old mammoth-ivory carving.
40,000 years old. It's just unfathomable.
It really is. It was discovered back in 1939 in the Swabian Jura caves in Germany.
And if you wanted to see it today, you'd go to Museum Ulm. Right.
Right. Museum Ulm is its real-world home. And the museum identifies it as one of the oldest known figurative sculptures in the world. It's got a human body with the head of a cave lion.
But Paul makes a really crucial distinction here in his research, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that this artifact it's literally just a piece of carved ivory. We have no idea what it meant to the hunter-gatherer society that actually made it.
So it has zero known backstory.
Zero. The name Löwenmensch was basically just tacked onto it by modern museum curators.
That is wild. It's essentially just a terrifying blank check. So there's no ancient Löwenmensch myth. There's just a really old statue sitting in Museum Ulm.
Exactly.
What really fascinates me is the pipeline here. How on earth does an obscure German archaeological find from the Swabian Jura caves end up in an American teen supernatural drama?
Well, Paul from Teen Wolf News actually dug into the writer's room for this. The whole Löwenmensch idea actually originated with executive producer Eric Wallace.
Oh, really? How did he know about it?
Well, Wallace actually spent part of his youth living on a U.S. Army base in Germany.
Ah, okay. That would have been, what, the 1980s?
Yeah, right in the 1980s. And that was a really significant time for this specific figurine. It was actually being painstakingly reassembled from hundreds of tiny fragments back then.
Oh, so it was probably all over the local news.
Exactly. It was this massive cultural moment in Germany, this symbol of primal European history re-emerging. So Wallace likely just absorbed that ambient cultural awareness while he was there.
That is so cool. It's amazing how a writer's, ambient childhood memory of a museum exhibit just casually becomes the foundational architecture for a supernatural Nazi villain decades later.
It really is. And it works perfectly because it allows the show to drape this prehistoric alterity over his 20th century fascist identity.
Alterity, you mean like a sense of deep otherness?
Exactly. An alien, untamed aura. He's presented as a Nazi officer, which is a very modern 20th century type of historical evil. But by linking him to a 40,000-year-old artifact, they give him this primordial weight.
So they don't even need to invent an exhaustive list of, lion powers for him. The sheer weight of that prehistoric reference just does all the heavy lifting for the audience.
Precisely.
Okay, so they have this incredible ancient visual aesthetic pulled from Museum Ulm. But, a statue can't move. It doesn't have an agenda.
Right, they have to give him an appetite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is where the historical archaeology stops and things get really weird. Because if his lion man identity comes from an ivory carving, that still doesn't explain his most gruesome behavior on the show.
You're talking about the brain eating.
I am talking about the brain eating. The show literally depicts Douglas biting open people's heads to eat the gummy centers of human brains.
Yeah, it's pretty graphic.
If you're just watching casually, it seems like standard feral monster behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Big teeth, cracking skulls, classic horror stuff.
But it's actually highly specific. He isn't just mindlessly attacking people.
Right. Paul's research highlights this interview with show creator Jeff Davis, and the explanation throws us straight out of archaeology and into early modern philosophy.
Which is such a brilliant pivot. Davis explains that Douglas is hunting specifically for the pineal gland.
The pineal gland. And this highly targeted diet connects him directly to Cartesian philosophies, specifically René Descartes, right?
Yes, 17th century philosophy.
Wait, so we literally have a werewolf-lion hybrid acting as a strict adherent of a 17th century French philosopher. That is such a wild leap.
It is a wild loop, but it's brilliant. So Descartes firmly believed in Cartesian dualism, the idea that the human physical body and the immaterial human soul are two entirely separate entities.
Okay, but if they're completely separate, they still have to interact somewhere, right?
Exactly. Descartes recognized that logical problem. He essentially viewed the human body as a mechanical drone, and he needed a physical location for the radio receiver.
And he decided that tiny little organ in the brain, the pineal gland, was that radio receiver.
Right. He literally called it the principal seat of the soul. He thought it was the single physical place where sensory information was processed and presented to the spiritual soul.
The irony is just staggering to me, because modern science completely demystifies the pineal gland.
Oh, entirely.
We know today that it's basically just a biological clock. It pumps out melatonin to help us sleep. It's great for a good night's rest, but it's definitely not some magical soul container.
No, modern empirical science proves Descartes was fundamentally wrong about its metaphysical properties.
But the brilliance of the character design here is that Garrett Douglas, he doesn't care about modern empirical science at all.
Not even a little bit. He is fully operating on a 17th century philosophical error. He treats a small anatomical organ as portable soul substance.
It's a literalized metaphysical hunger. He's treating the soul not as this abstract concept, but as a supernatural snack that he can just harvest to charge his own batteries.
Which is what elevates him from just a feral beast to a doctrinal villain.
Yeah.
As Paul's research makes clear, Douglas is acting on an occult rationality here.
An occult rationality. I like that.
Think about the primary antagonists of that season, the Ghost Riders. They operate on this cosmic economy of theft. They steal people from reality, erasing them from memory entirely.
Right, and Douglas is trying to imitate that exact economy of theft.
Yes, but he has to do it materially. So he physically removes the anatomical part of the body that he believes houses the soul.
He's literally turning a fragment of French philosophy into visceral horror iconography. It's so disturbing. But why does he need to hoard all these Cartesian soul batteries in the first place?
Well, according to Paul, he's doing it to rival those ghostwriters.
Ah, okay. Which brings us to the third massive component of his hybrid nature, the ghostwriter dimensional energy.
This third piece is crucial because it really highlights the limits of his assembled nature. He didn't naturally become a full ghostwriter.
No, he basically got a bootleg upgrade.
Exactly. Paul's research details how this aspect comes entirely from prolonged exposure to dimensional energy. He was literally soaking for 70 years in a dread doctor's vat.
Like a slow, terrifying marinade.
A very terrifying marinade. The water was being infected by dimensional energy leaking from an unhealed wound on his body.
A wound from a ghostwriter's whip, right?
Right. He was absorbing that ambient power for 7 decades. But we have to note the strict limitations here. He only absorbs the residue. He never gains their actual sovereign mastery.
And the limits are so glaring once you look for them. Sure, he can use their specific weapons, and the ghostwriters kind of seem to recognize him.
But he absolutely cannot perform their primary functions.
Right. He can't open portals independently. He literally has to command the hellhound perish to open them for him. And he can't erase people from reality like the true writers can.
His entire monstrosity is just marked by aspiration and incompletion. The most compelling thing about him isn't his power, it's his fundamental lack of it.
Is his defining characteristic actually his lack of power? Like, he's essentially a counterfeit god trying to compensate for what he can't naturally do by hoarding pineal glands?
It really paints him as a surprisingly tragic or pathetic figure, despite how dangerous he is. It's this portrait of an authoritarian desire to command what he does not own.
He wants the absolute authority of a true cosmological entity, but he's just a patchwork imitation.
Driven by a profound sense of inadequacy, yeah.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture here, bringing all these disparate strands together, we hit the core argument of Paul's research.
We have the alpha werewolf, the aesthetic of the Swabian Jura artifact from Museum Ulm, Cartesian soul theory, and ghostwriter dimensional residue.
It's an absolutely bizarre Frankenstein assembly, but the wild part is that it actually works.
It functions incredibly well, specifically because Teen Wolf combines these totally incompatible but highly suggestive source materials.
It makes for a brilliantly layered monster design.
Right, because each distinct element gives the audience a different psychological trigger. The archaeology gives you the sheer weight of antiquity without the constraints of a canon.
And Descartes gives you this dense metaphysical vocabulary, the seat of the soul, without the burden of modern empirical credibility.
Exactly. And then his background as a Nazi officer offers this immediate, universally recognizable historical evil.
Just think about the journey we just took. We traveled from a 40,000-year-old mammoth-ivory carving in a German museum straight into the pages of René Descartes, through the trauma of historical fascism, and finally into a sci-fi vat of dimensional energy.
All to understand a single composite television creature.
And every single piece of that puzzle is necessary to understand his hunger. It just shows that modern storytelling doesn't need inherited folklore to scare us anymore.
No, the raw materials of history and discarded science are potent enough all on their own.
History itself is becoming the new mythology. We don't need to invent fictional demons when we have unexplained museum relics just waiting to be weaponized.